The wind that night didn't just howl, it screamed. Aspen lay buried beneath a silver storm, and up on Hartman Hill the mansion that overlooked the frozen valley flickered with restless light. Inside, billionaire William Hartman sat alone, the glow from the fireplace, tracing the edges of a life too perfect and too empty. But outside his gates something moved, something small, desperate, and entirely out of place. A girl was rummaging through his mailbox. Not stealing. Searching. Like someone looking for a piece of her soul. Have you ever witnessed something that shattered the logic of your world in one glance? That's what this moment did to William. Stay with this story because what he found next would unravel secrets buried for a decade and force him to face the kind of truth that money can't silence. The camera of his security drone zoomed in, and there she was, maybe 9, maybe 10, hair tangled by snow jacket, 2 sizes too small, holding what looked like a Christmas card. William leaned closer to the screen. The girl wasn't afraid of the camera. She stared straight into it. For a second, he could swear she looked right at him through the lens. Then she reached inside the mailbox again, carefully pulled out a torn envelope and pressed it to her chest. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his coat, and stepped out into the storm. The wind bit through his tailored wool like punishment. He shouted across the yard, "Hey, what are you doing?" The girl froze, then stumbled backward, slipping on the icy ground. The card fell. He caught it before it hit the snow. On the front in faded glitter were the words, "To Dad, Merry Christmas." For a man who'd built satellites, coded empires, and buried his heart, years ago those words hit harder than any boardroom betrayal. "Who gave you this?" he asked, trying to sound stern, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The girl didn't answer. She just whispered, "I thought this was his house." William's mind spun. His house had been empty of laughter since his wife Laura passed away 7 Christmases ago. No children, no relatives nearby, just an empire of silence. Yet here stood a child trembling in his driveway, holding a card that spoke directly to him. He noticed her hands red and raw from cold, clutching a threadbare backpack. "You're freezing," he muttered, opening the gate. "Come inside." She hesitated, glancing toward the road where a dark SUV idled before pulling away. Fear flashed across her face. That look told him this wasn't a simple case of a lost child. She was running from something or someone. Inside, the mansion's warmth seemed to confuse her. She didn't sit until he pointed to a stool near the fireplace. As she thawed, he poured cocoa, something he hadn't done in years. Her eyes followed every move, cautious but curious. He asked her name. "Ella," she said softly. "My mom told me if I ever got lost, to find this house." That line nearly made him drop the mug. "Your mom knows me. She said you helped her once." Ella whispered, pulling a worn photograph from her bag. William took it and the room seemed to tilt. It was him, 15 years younger, standing beside a woman with bright eyes and a snowflake pendant. Clara Evans. He hadn't heard that name since before his first billion, before Laura, before the boardroom wars. The woman he'd promised to call and never did. His throat tightened. "Where's your mom now?" The girl looked down. She said, "She'd meet me after I gave you the letter." He reached for it, but she shook her head. "You're not supposed to open it until Christmas morning." A thunder of emotions collided. Fear, guilt, disbelief. His mind flashed through possibilities, scam, setup, blackmail. But when she lifted her gaze, he saw something terrifyingly pure: hope. The kind of hope you can't fake. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in white silence. In the distance, that same black SUV reappeared, headlights dimmed, crawling back toward the gate. William's security sensors blinked red. Someone was watching. He turned off the main lights, heart pounding. "Do you know that car?" he asked. Ella's eyes widened, and she clutched the envelope tighter. "They said I shouldn't come here," she murmured, her voice cracking. "But I had to. Mom said you'd tell me the truth." William didn't know which truth she meant, the one about Clara, about himself, or something much darker. The storm outside roared louder, as if nature itself demanded the reckoning he'd avoided for years. He took a breath and knelt so he could meet her at eye level. "You're safe here tonight," he said. But even as he spoke, he wasn't sure if that was true. In that moment, the world's richest man realized he was about to confront something no amount of money could control the past. And what waited in that sealed letter would not just test his conscience. It would rewrite everything he thought he knew about love loss and family. The fire crackled, the power flickered, and somewhere deep in the house a motion sensor beeped again. He looked toward the window, then back at the girl. For the first time in years, William Hartman felt fear, not for his fortune, but for the fragile, mysterious life that had just stepped through his door. Stay with this story. What's hidden in that letter, and what connects a runaway child to a billionaire's forgotten past, will shock you more than any twist you've heard this Christmas. The morning after that storm felt unreal, the kind of quiet that only follows a night that changes everything. William Hartman woke to find sunlight crawling through his study windows, glinting off the half-empty cup of cocoa he'd forgotten beside the fireplace. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream. The girl, the envelope, the strange weight of that name from his past. Then he heard soft footsteps in the hall. Ella stood there in one of his oversized sweater's sleeves dangling past her hands. The innocence in her small frame clashed with the chaos she'd brought into his world. She held the envelope to her chest, as if guarding a secret too precious for daylight. "You didn't open it, did you?" she asked quietly. "No," he said. "You told me not to." "Good," she murmured, then turned toward the window. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, tiny, fragile, yet somehow unshakable. William watched her and felt a tightening in his chest. He'd spent years believing his past had been sealed away behind contracts and memories buried under success. Now, a child had walked straight through that armor with a piece of paper. He poured her breakfast and tried to make small talk, but Ella barely ate. Every answer she gave was half a whisper, half a test of whether she could trust him. When she spoke of her mother, her voice softened. "Mom said you once built things that could reach the sky," she said. "But she also said you forgot how to look up." William's spoon froze midair. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. Clara had spoken like that too, turning truth into gentle riddles. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but the girl's face was pale with exhaustion. Instead, he said, "When you're ready, maybe you can tell me how you found this place." She nodded, but before she could answer, his intercom buzzed. The housekeeper's voice crackled. "Mr. Hartman, there's a vehicle parked near the east gate. They've been there since dawn." William's pulse quickened. He glanced toward the window, but the snow glare made it impossible to see beyond the trees. When he turned back, Ella was gripping her backpack again, knuckles white. "Who's looking for you?" "Ella." She shook her head. "They work for the home." "What home?" "The one they took me to after Mom." She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "They said it was safe, but people there." She didn't finish. Something primal stirred in him. He'd funded countless charities and social programs, all vetted, all respectable. The idea that one of them could harm a child made his stomach twist. "Do you remember its name?" he asked. Ella hesitated, then whispered, "Silverwood Trust." William froze. That was one of his own foundations, a philanthropy branch created years ago to support foster placements. He hadn't looked into it in ages. His assistant handled the oversight reports. "You're sure?" he said softly. She nodded. Mom said she worked there before it changed, before they made her leave. It felt like the floor beneath him cracked open. Clara Evans, fired from Silverwood 10 years ago. The timing matched too perfectly to ignore. He opened his laptop fingers, trembling slightly as he searched internal records. Access denied, administrative lockout. He tried a secondary route, again denied. That had never happened before. "Mr. Hartman." Ella's small voice broke the silence. "Did I do something wrong?" He looked up, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart. You did everything right." The phrase came out more tender than intended. It startled him. He wasn't used to gentleness anymore. For years, his tone had been shaped by meetings, not moments like this. As he tried another access key, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered. A calm, polite voice spoke. "Mr. Hartman, this is Director Miles from Silverwood Trust. We've been notified that a ward of ours may have mistakenly come to your residence. We'd like to retrieve her safely." William's jaw tightened. "She's safe here," he said, "and she's not leaving until I understand what's going on." There was a pause, too smooth, too measured. "Sir, I strongly advise against interference. Some things are better handled quietly." The line went dead. Ella stood frozen, her cocoa untouched. "That's them," she whispered. William crossed the room and knelt beside her again. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "Not until I talk to someone I trust." He called Beverly Lane his longtime attorney, and one of the few people who had stayed with him since his early startup days. When he explained the situation, her voice shifted from disbelief to controlled urgency. "William Silverwood's been under quiet review for months. Allegations of fund mismanagement, falsified care reports. If that girl came from there, don't let anyone take her without a court order." He looked toward Ella, who now sat, hugging her knees by the fire. The sunlight had shifted, turning the frost on the window into tiny mirrors. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, trembling with something real. The envelope still lay on the coffee table. He picked it up, studying the handwriting. Clara's looping script, faint but unmistakable. He turned it over in his hand, tempted to tear it open, right there. But he didn't. Somehow he knew the letter wasn't just words, it was judgment. It was truth waiting to be faced on its own time. Instead, he tucked it back under Ella's hand. "Keep it safe," he said. "Your mom trusted you with it. That means it matters." Ella looked up, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled, small, uncertain, but enough to make something inside him ache. Outside, the black SUV was gone. The world seemed calm again. But in William's gut, the storm hadn't passed. The letter in that child's hand wasn't just a message from the past. It was a mirror, and he wasn't sure he'd like what he'd see when it finally opened. William spent the next 48 hours in a blur of unanswered questions and half-truths. The letter still sat on his desk unopened, but everything around it began to shift. He wasn't the kind of man who accepted being locked out of his own systems. When his access to the Silverwood Trust database was denied, he called in favors quietly. A cybersecurity contact owed him a debt from his early venture capital days. Within an hour, William had full server access, and the shock of seeing what lay behind the glossy reports his board had fed him. The numbers didn't add up. Foster home budgets were duplicated across different counties, and entire lists of children appeared twice under different IDs. But what hit hardest wasn't financial, it was personal. One file marked Clara Evans. Termination conflict of interest dated 10 years earlier carried his own digital signature. He scrolled through the attached memo and froze. The language wasn't his, but the authorization code was. Someone inside his team had used his credentials to approve her dismissal. The reason cited unethical attachment to a ward under care child relocation recommended. That ward's name was redacted, replaced with a string of asterisks. William's stomach turned. He shut the laptop and stared at the letter again. He didn't dare open it, not yet. Truth felt heavier when it came from someone who could no longer defend herself. Beverly arrived later that afternoon, shaking snow off her coat. "You look like hell," she said flatly. "Thanks," he muttered. "You'd look worse if you saw what I found." They went through the documents together. Beverly's practiced calm gave way to disbelief. "William, these aren't accounting errors. They're laundering funds through child placements. It's structured fraud hidden under welfare grants." He ran a hand through his hair. "And the girl, Ella, was part of this." "She might be the key," Beverly replied. "If her mother was fired for opposing this, someone made sure the record disappeared. But I need to confirm through legal channels before you confront anyone." That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked through the house past portraits and awards that once meant something until he reached the guest room. Ella was asleep curled up with a stuffed fox he'd bought earlier that day. For a man whose world revolved around results, he suddenly felt the weight of something immeasurable responsibility. The next morning, he drove to Denver to visit the state records office. Connections still mattered, and his name opened doors. The clerk hesitated but handed him a scanned copy of an archived file. Clara Evans, former employee of Silverwood Trust, deceased automobile accident, 2016. The death certificate looked official, yet something about the hospital signature bothered him. He traced the physician's name, Dr. Henry Lawford. Beverly later confirmed the same doctor appeared on multiple Silverwood child injury cases. William's jaw tightened. "They buried her story," he said. "Or they made her disappear," Beverly replied. He stared out the office window toward the snow-coated skyline. The image of Clara's smile in that photograph flickered in his memory. She'd once told him, "If you ever lose your way, follow what scares you most. That's where truth hides." That night, William searched every reference to Lawford and Silverwood he could find. A web of shell companies appeared, each feeding money back into a corporate holding group named Greystone Partners, a name he recognized. The CEO, Marcus Tilden, had served on one of Hartman's early advisory boards. The realization hit like ice water. This wasn't just a corrupted charity, it was an enterprise protected by people who'd sat at his own table. He printed everything and stacked it beside the unopened letter. It felt like the letter was watching him, daring him to confirm what he already feared. But before he could reach for it, his intercom buzzed. The guard's voice sounded tense. "Sir, 2 men in suits at the gate." "They say they're from Silverwood Trust, here on official retrieval." William told the guard to stall them, then turned to Ella, who had appeared silently in the hallway. Her eyes were wide alert in that way children learn when life has taught them fear. "It's them again, isn't it?" she whispered. He nodded. "Pack your things. We're leaving." They slipped out the back entrance through the service road that wound down to the main highway. The storm had cleared, leaving a brittle cold that sliced through his lungs. He drove without headlights for the first few miles, every nerve alive. Beverly called from her office, warning him she'd filed for emergency guardianship papers under his name. "But you need to stay off the radar," she added. "If Silverwood's connected to Greystone, they'll move fast." They reached a roadside diner near Glenwood Springs. The waitress, kind and curious, served pancakes without asking questions. Ella ate quietly, while William spread the printed files across the booth. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became. Silverwood Trust wasn't just mishandling funds. It was funneling children through temporary care programs to test behavioral models for pharmaceutical partners, masked as wellness research. Clara had uncovered it. Her firing and her accident had been the silencing mechanism. When Ella finally looked up, syrup glistening on her lips, she asked, "Is my mom in trouble?" He froze. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "Your mom tried to fix what was broken. They didn't let her." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the envelope again. She said the truth was inside this, that you'd know when to open it. William looked at the letter, then at her. The diner's neon lights flickered against the window, painting them both in red and blue flashes like a warning. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, followed by heavy footsteps. He folded the papers and took her hand. Time to go. They slipped out through the back alley just as two men in dark coats entered the diner. The sound of their voices carried calm professional rehearsed. William's pulse raced as he led Ella to the car. Snow crunched beneath their boots, every step echoing louder than it should. As he drove back toward the mountains, the reality of what he'd uncovered settled in. The letter wasn't just about love or loss. It was a breadcrumb left by a woman who had tried to expose something monstrous. And somehow her daughter had delivered it into the hands of the only man powerful enough to finish what she started. The truth wasn't fully out yet, but William knew this much: the men who built Silverwood had underestimated one thing. A billionaire with nothing left to lose doesn't run from the truth, he hunts it. By the time the snow melted in Aspen, William Hartman had become the center of a storm that no weather could rival. What began as a quiet investigation had exploded into national headlines. News outlets flashed images of him escorting Ella through courthouse doors, while pundits debated whether he was a hero or a man covering his own corruption. But William didn't care about optics anymore. He cared about truth. And the truth was uglier than he'd imagined. Beverly's legal team had filed an injunction against Silverwood Trust, forcing the release of thousands of internal records. What emerged was staggering. Dozens of children displaced under the guise of temporary relocation had vanished from the system entirely. The fraudulent signatures, the shell companies, the experimental research partnerships, all of it led back to Greystone Partners and to the man William once called his friend, Marcus Tilden. Marcus was everything William used to admire: calm, polished, ruthless in business. When William confronted him in a private boardroom overlooking downtown Denver, the air between them felt like a drawn wire. "You knew," William said quietly. "You used my name, my foundation, my money to traffic children through a system meant to protect them." Marcus didn't flinch. "You gave me the keys," he replied smoothly. "You were too busy chasing profit to notice what the engine was running on." The words cut deep because they were true. For years, William had trusted the system he built. The irony burned him from the inside out. He leaned forward, his voice cold. "This ends now." Marcus smiled faintly. "You think the public will care about a dead social worker and a runaway girl? You'll lose everything before they even believe you." William stood the weight of the moment pressing on every muscle. "Maybe I deserve to lose everything," he said. "But you're going to lose your freedom." Within hours, he leaked the evidence emails, contracts, bank transfers to every major outlet in the country. What followed was chaos. Silverwood executives scrambled to deny involvement. Law enforcement launched raids across 3 states. Marcus Tilden was arrested trying to board a private jet to Zurich. But as the system cracked open, so did the lies around Clara Evans's death. The hospital records Beverly unearthed showed no autopsy, no police report, just a quick burial under a falsified name. William attended the exhumation in silence, the wind cold against his face. When they confirmed the identity, he stood motionless, jaw clenched. "They erased her," he whispered. Back in Aspen, Ella clung to him like an anchor. She didn't understand the politics or the headlines, but she understood grief. The night before the hearing, she sat beside him on the couch, the unopened letter still in her lap. She said, "You'd make things right," she said. William hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow, I will." The next morning, the courtroom overflowed. Cameras, reporters, families of missing children all waiting for a reckoning. When William took the stand, he didn't read from a statement. He spoke as a man stripped of excuses. "I built a system that I believed in," he said, voice steady. "But belief without responsibility is blindness. I let good intentions become a cover for greed, and I let trust turn into silence." He turned toward Ella, sitting in the front row, clutching the letter. "If there's one thing this child taught me, it's that truth has no price tag. It doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the brave." The prosecutor revealed the final piece of evidence, Clara's last recorded voicemail recovered from an old storage drive. Her voice, faint but resolute, filled the courtroom. "If this reaches you, well, don't look away. They're hurting the children. Promise me you'll stop them." Tears slipped down William's face. He didn't wipe them. For the first time in years, he let the world see him as human. The judge called for order, but the silence that followed was heavy reverent. By evening, the story had overtaken every network. Lawmakers demanded inquiries. The Department of Justice opened a federal case against Greystone. Marcus Tilden's smug smile on the news was replaced by a mugshot. And through it all, William refused interviews. Instead, he held a single press conference outside the courthouse under falling snow that reminded him of the night everything began. "I'm not here to restore an image," he told the cameras. "I'm here to restore a promise to every child who was forgotten, every parent who was silenced. The Clara Foundation will rebuild what greed destroyed. We'll make sure no one hides behind my name again." The crowd was silent for a moment before a ripple of applause broke through raw and genuine. That night, back home, Ella finally handed him the letter. Her fingers trembled as she passed it over. "She wanted you to read it when the truth was safe," she said. William unfolded the paper. The ink slightly faded, but the handwriting unmistakable. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. But maybe you can. Tell her the world isn't as cruel as it seems. And tell yourself it's not too late to remember who you were before the noise." He folded the letter carefully, staring into the fire. The crackle of burning wood sounded almost like breathing steady alive. He realized then that redemption didn't erase the past, it illuminated it. The reckoning wasn't punishment, it was grace in motion. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet and unassuming. For the first time in a decade, William let himself believe in something bigger than guilt. He believed in second chances. A year later, Aspen looked different. The snow still fell heavy that December, but it didn't feel cold anymore. The grand estate on Hartman Hill, once a monument to isolation, had been reborn. The gates were open now, welcoming cars filled with families, volunteers, and children bundled in scarves, too big for their faces. A carved wooden sign hung above the entryway, the Clara Foundation. A home for hope. Inside, warmth radiated everywhere. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the halls. Laughter bounced off walls that had once echoed with silence. Where portraits of investors and awards once hung, now there were drawings by children, messy, colorful, alive. At the center of it all stood William Hartman, sleeves rolled up, tying ribbons around gifts with a focus that made his staff smile. The billionaire who once avoided every human connection was now surrounded by them. Ella darted between tables, helping place name tags on presents. She was taller now, her hair longer, her confidence shining through. When William looked at her, he didn't just see the child who had changed his life, He saw the reason he'd found it again. "Careful with that bow," he teased, as she tied one crookedly. "It's supposed to look handmade," she said, grinning. "It's called character." He laughed softly. "Then you've got plenty of it." The event that night was the Foundation's first annual Christmas Eve celebration. Hundreds had gathered: foster families, social workers, local leaders, even some of the journalists who had once chased William through courthouse steps. This time, the cameras weren't here for scandal. They were here for a miracle. Beverly stood near the buffet table, glass of cider in hand, watching the crowd. When William approached, she smiled. "You've outdone yourself, Will. It's beautiful." He shrugged. "It's their night, not mine." She studied him for a moment. "You know you could have rebuilt your reputation quietly. Donated money kept your name out of it. But you opened your home. You made this personal." He looked around the room, the children decorating cookies, the volunteers chatting by the fireplace, the tree covered in hand-painted ornaments. "It had to be personal," he said. "That's how the damage started. I let people become numbers. This is how I fix it, one name at a time." The sound of a choir began to fill the room, young voices singing Silent Night. For a moment, everyone paused, heads tilted toward the music. Ella slipped her hand into William's. "Mom used to sing this," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then tonight she's here too." Outside, the air was crisp, the stars sharp against the black sky. When the choir finished, William took the small stage near the fireplace. The crowd quieted as he adjusted the microphone, his voice calm but full of emotion. "Last year," he began, "I spent Christmas alone, believing the best years of my life were behind me. I was wrong. The truth is, sometimes life gives you a second chance, but it hides it in the form of responsibility. When a frightened little girl showed up at my gate, I thought she needed saving. It turns out she was here to save me." He paused, letting the words settle. "The Clara Foundation isn't just about what we lost. It's about what we can rebuild together. It's about every child who deserves safety, every parent who deserves forgiveness, and every stranger who's willing to care when it's easier not to." A ripple of quiet applause spread through the hall. Some people wiped their eyes. He nodded toward Ella, who stood proudly by the Christmas tree holding the same letter her mother had written, the letter that had started everything. After the speeches, the night unfolded softly. Volunteers served food, children sang carols, and someone dressed as Santa handed out gifts. William moved through the crowd not as the billionaire on the magazine covers, but as a man who finally belonged somewhere. Later, when most of the guests had left, he and Ella stepped outside onto the porch. Snow fell in slow, lazy flakes, each one catching the glow from the lanterns. She leaned against the railing, her breath forming clouds in the air. "You did it," she said quietly. "You kept your promise." He looked down at her. "No, we did. You brought the truth here, remember." She smiled but said nothing. Then after a moment she asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you ever think about her?" He nodded, "Every day. But now, when I think about her, it doesn't hurt as much. It reminds me why we're here." She hesitated, then looked up with the same earnestness that had stopped him cold that first night. "So, can I call you Dad now?" William didn't speak right away. He just smiled, his throat tightening. Then he knelt so they were eye to eye. "You already do," he said softly. Tears welled in her eyes, and she threw her arms around him. For a long moment they stayed like that, two lives that had collided by chance, bound now by something deeper than blood. Inside, Beverly watched from the doorway, wiping her own tears. Behind her, a small group of volunteers began cleaning up. One of them whispered, "You think he'll ever retire?" Beverly smiled faintly. not from this. Some debts aren't meant to be paid off, they're meant to be lived. Later that night, when the house was quiet, William sat alone by the fireplace. He unfolded Clara's letter one last time, tracing her handwriting with his thumb. The paper had grown soft with age and handling, but the words still glowed with life. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. But you can. Remember that redemption isn't found in silence, it's in courage. When the world feels too heavy, find the child still waiting in you and protect them as fiercely as you would protect her. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small frame beside the mantel. Then he picked up another piece of paper, a new letter written in his own hand. For Ella, open on your 18th Christmas. The clock struck midnight. Bells from the nearby church echoed down the valley. William turned toward the window and watched the snow fall thicker, covering the footprints that led from the gate to the porch. The same path where 1 year ago a frightened little girl had changed his life forever. He closed his eyes, whispered a silent prayer of thanks, and for the first time in decades felt peace settle deep in his bones. Outside, the laughter of children still drifted through the cold air, mingling with the sound of sleigh bells and distant singing. Christmas had always been about miracles, but now he understood the truth. It wasn't the season that brought them. It was people. People brave enough to open a door to face their past, to love when it was easier to hide. And somewhere beyond the falling snow and the hush between night and dawn, it felt as if Clara herself was smiling. The promise had been kept. The child was safe. And the man who once lived behind gates of glass had finally learned what it meant to come home. In the end, the story of William Hartman and the little girl who appeared at his gate on Christmas night wasn't about wealth, scandal, or redemption in the public eye. It was about the quiet, transformative power of human connection. A man who had everything the world could offer: money, influence, success, discovered that none of it could fill the silence in his home or the emptiness in his heart. Yet one small act of courage from a child changed everything. Ella's innocence, her trust, and her determination to find truth reignited something in him that no business triumph ever could purpose. William's journey from isolation to meaning wasn't clean or easy. He had to confront betrayal, corruption, and the ghosts of his own choices. He had to see the consequences of indifference, the suffering hidden behind spreadsheets and charity reports. Through Ella, he learned that real responsibility doesn't end when the check clears. It begins when we look into the eyes of someone who needs us and choose to act. The empire he once built for prestige became a foundation for healing, not just for others, but for himself. The Clara Foundation was born not from guilt, but from love reclaimed. It became proof that change is possible at any stage of life, that even the most broken systems can be rebuilt if someone has the courage to take ownership. It became a home for children who'd lost their voices, for mothers who'd been silenced, and for a man who'd finally learned how to listen. What started as an encounter in the snow evolved into a promise kept through every child given a future, every story given a name. When William opened his home and his heart, he didn't just find redemption, he found family. Ella's presence turned his life from a lonely climb toward success into a shared journey toward hope. Together they honored Clara's memory not by mourning her loss, but by continuing her mission. Every laugh echoing through the halls of the foundation, every Christmas light glowing across the valley became a symbol of what happens when compassion defeats fear. And perhaps that's the true heart of this story, that miracles don't always arrive in grand gestures or divine timing. Sometimes they appear in the form of a lost child on a cold night, reminding us that kindness can find its way through even the darkest storm. The story of William and Ella reminds us that the walls we build, whether made of glass, pride, or pain, can all be opened by empathy. The richest person isn't the one who owns the most, but the one who gives the most of themselves. For all of us watching, listening, or reading this story today, there's a lesson quietly tucked between each chapter. It's a reminder to look around at the people who might need us to see beyond our routines, our screens, and our assumptions. Maybe there's an Ella in your life, a person waiting for someone to open a door to ask a question to care enough to stay. Or maybe, like William, you've built a life so focused on surviving that you've forgotten what it means to truly live. If so, remember, it's never too late to start again. Redemption doesn't erase the past, it transforms it into purpose. Let this story be your spark this season. Be the one who chooses compassion over convenience, courage over comfort, and love over silence. Because somewhere out there, your smallest act of kindness could be the miracle someone else has been praying for. And if stories like this remind you of the goodness that still exists in the world, we'd love for you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel, share these stories, and help us keep spreading messages of hope, faith, and second chances. Your support gives us the strength to continue creating meaningful stories that touch hearts, heal wounds, and inspire change. Thank you for being part of this journey, and remember, as William Hartman learned under the falling snow, the most extraordinary miracles often begin with a simple human choice to open the door.